it's crazy, but it's
You're watching Channel Z, the world's leading zombie apocalypse channel. Broadcasting live from Studio Z.
makes me act the way.
Oh.
This is Undead Live Afternoon Edition, reporting from the front lines of the zombie apocalypse. We have your back morning, noon, and night, whether you're dead, undead, recently deceased, or fully alive. Today is Saturday, October 17th. I'm Athena Actipus.
And I'm Dave Lundberg-Kenrick. And this afternoon we will be looking at the diverse undead from the... Wait, that's not right.
We'll take a deeper look into zombification processes behind social media and the ways that we can use social media to fight the zombie apocalypse. But before we jump in with that, we have an update from the front lines of the zombie apocalypse from our favorite correspondents, Steve and Larry.
That's right. So now they can't be here, but they sent in this video.
Wait, what do you mean they can't be here?
I mean... I don't know. They can't be here. You know, it's a mystery.
Are they okay? They just sent the video. They didn't say anything about how they're doing.
I think we watch the video and see. Hopefully, it'll give us a clue. So,
all right. Okay. I hope they're all right.
All right.
Stairs. Can zombies go upstairs? Let's see. Night of the Living Dead, no, they didn't go upstairs. Day of the Dead, they walked through, no, it was Land of the Dead when they walked through waters. Well, so I can put this stuff on the stairs. There's too many windows. Why isn't the modern suburban house made for proper barricading? Oh, this is it. This is where I can go hide.
They're hiding. He's hiding, it looks like.
I didn't even see his face in that video.
I think that was Steve, right? So
yeah, that was Steve. It sounded like Steve. I can't tell if there's really a threat going on or if he's just kind of losing it.
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't see his dog. I didn't see his family. So I don't know who he's hiding from. I don't know if people are hiding from him. I don't know if he's hiding from himself. It's but that's what we got. That's all we got. We got a video, no commentary, just a video of him looking for a place to hide.
All right. Well, I think we should definitely try to get back in touch with both of them, and hopefully we'll have them on in the tomorrow or soon.
Yeah. We're still reaching out to them, so okay. You know, I'm sure he's still there. He's still hanging in there. Clearly, you know. He's still got a voice. He's still walking around. So
that's a good point. Okay, so let's move on with the show then. Sure. So let's welcome journalist and professor Sri Srinivasan to talk with us this afternoon about how social media can harm us, but how it can also help us to fight the zombie apocalypse. Sri, thank you so much for joining us today on Undead Live.
I feel like I'm in a sandwich between the two of you, but there you are. You've let me have my own space here. Thank you very much, folks. I'm greetings from San Juan, Puerto Rico. I'm here sheltering in place, ready for the coming civil war or zombie apocalypse. Maybe they'll all blend in together. I'm excited to be part of ZAM and to learn from all these amazing colleagues that you've brought in, so many different disciplines. For my pandemic project this summer and spring, I've been doing interviews with experts about COVID and various aspects of this. I spoke to more than 400 people, and I have to tell you, my brain hurts because I've learned so much from talking to all these experts. And one of the things I learned is that everything could have been prevented. We would certainly have had the pandemic happen to us, but not to the extent that it did, and we could have saved tens of thousands of lives. I did get to hear Athena on one of my early shows, and she taught me a lot, including that it's important to laugh once in a while, because otherwise you will cry all day. And with the state of how rotten everything is, it's important for each of us to find the time to make sure we are taking care of ourselves in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of an apocalypse, zombie or otherwise. Now, every movie and book about the dystopian future that awaits us starts with a virus or a vaccine gone awry, so we know where we're headed. But every one of our great science fiction writers got two things wrong. They never predicted that our government, our own president, would be on the side of the virus at hand. They could never have foreseen that, and they didn't. Every single story was about all of us as Americans and the planet getting together and fighting these seen and unseen enemies. And we could never have predicted that we would have a president and governors and others slowly poisoning us with misinformation, disinformation, and political mischief. It's just something that even our best Hollywood minds and our most inventive writers could not think of. And that's partly the reason we're here. They also didn't predict that we would have things like electricity, the internet, and the food supply system. All of these are still intact at the moment, but we don't know for how long. So let me make sure I give you, I'm superstitious enough to make sure that I knock wood on that. We have, all of us, as we have been forced to think about what an apocalypse might look like, we've had to learn that an apocalypse doesn't mean just that you are out there fighting the zombies, you're out there roaming the streets and working in gangs to stay alive. That's one way this can still go. But we also learn the importance of making sure that we are having as many resources for our friends and family and our communities. Those are so hard in the middle of what is happening here. We've also seen the great divide that has happened because there are folks who are able to decamp from their big cities and go hide out in rural areas and have all kinds of facilities, and others who are lining up for food, as is happening right now in New York City on Saturday mornings. More than 10,000 people stand in line to get food, and that's not counting all the other food banks and drive-through food stores and things that are being made available to the hungry in this country. Just shows you how badly how unprepared we have been for the apocalypse, for the crisis at hand. And the tragedy of all of this is that there's so much that could have been done. And when we have our conversation, I would love to talk about that. I wanted to focus on just a few things around the crisis and the apocalypse and what we can do to understand the apocalypse, and also the role that social media plays in it. And again, all our fiction writers all thought of a world where there was no social media because there was no electricity once the apocalypse came. It was all, baseball bats and barbed wire and other things to stay alive. But what if we are in an apocalypse where the internet continues to work? We have gotten a taste of that now. And what can we do, and how can social media help us survive now and then the next apocalypse? In every single story, nothing ever comes back, right? It's not like everything is then put together again and then we wait for the next apocalypse. But that is maybe what's going to happen now. We're hopeful that we'll survive this one, but what happens the next time, and what can we do? As I talk about how social media can help us survive the apocalypse, I want to acknowledge that social media brought us here in the first place, making us addicted to those notifications on our phones, planting ideas that have been terrible for mankind, weaponizing simple acts that should have been non-political in every way, starting with the wearing of masks. And they took the most unpolitical of acts and made it into a political weapon. That's what social media did. That's what the platforms all did. And they have to answer for that. And they continue to do that. And we are all prisoners of the way in which these platforms behave. So some thoughts for you. One is to listen to accurate sources of information during the apocalypse. Where are you finding out? Where are the clusters of zombies right now? Who is spreading the zombie-ness around the country by holding rallies in the middle of this apocalypse and causing more people to be zombified for no reason except out of pure selfishness? Unfollow those people who are causing all of us pain. It's something that we all need to do. We need to hold accountable the folks who have done nothing but add to everyone's misery in the middle of all of this. Some simple things that folks can do. Turn off your notifications on your phone. There have been study after study has shown that these tools, especially the use of notification, was created by the tech folks in order to have you respond and get in, and answer the phone and take a look at the phone and connect in ways that we hadn't quite expected. So simple thing, turn off those notifications. I urge everyone to do that. Another is to grayscale your phone, which some of you have already done, which is you go into your phone, and depending on iPhone or Android, there are different ways to do it. You can Google how to grayscale your phone. By turning off the colors on your phone, you will automatically find you are less addicted to your phone, because it becomes the colors and the icons and the sounds and the notifications, all of those work together to poison our brain. And so if you grayscale your phone, you immediately find yourself not as interested in the phone. So it sounds kind of ridiculous, but if you haven't done this yet, I beg you to grayscale your phone. You will find what a difference that makes. One of the issues around this, and by the way, you should know that you're not the first conference where I was asked to talk about zombies and the apocalypse. I did this 2 years ago in Hawaii at an event hosted by the Shangri-La Museum of Culture, Art, and Design. And we talked about how bad screen time was for everybody and how we have to reduce it. And of course, along comes the pandemic and the apocalypse, and we are now more addicted to screen time than ever before. So how did that happen? We were supposed to use it less, but in the pandemic, we're using our screens even more. So please set up, if you haven't done this on your phone, the screen time feature on iPhone or the digital well-being tools on Android, and tracking how much time you're spending on your phones is going to make a difference in tracking and therefore understanding what you're doing on your electronic devices. And I think it's really important to emphasize a plan with how you use phones if you have children, or even if you don't, no devices at the dining table. This is something that I emphasize a lot with my own family, except of course to take Instagram photos for the apocalypse of what you're eating. The idea of not having devices so that you can connect with the people you're quarantining with is important, but just trying to, even if you're doing a Zoom call, maybe taking the idea that no one uses a device apart from the Zoom machine itself, so that you're listening and paying attention and participating, and you're there as much as we can be in the middle of all of this. I have a dear friend, a technology and social media expert named Tim McDonald, who said that as connected as I am, my phone never enters the bedroom. And how many of us would have the courage to do that? I wouldn't do it because I need to know where the zombies are at any point and what is coming out of our leaders in Washington. So I won't do it, but I encourage everybody else to think about ways in which we are all using digital tools more than ever, but are there boundaries we can set for ourselves in terms of the time we use them, the places we use them, and the scenarios in which we're using them, as we are with our friends and family, or even if you're going for a distant walk, a socially distant walk with a friend in a park and outdoors. Those are things that I think are really important for all of us to get through this crisis, this pandemic, this apocalypse as we're experiencing it now. But social media can help you survive this and at least prepare for the next one if you follow some of the suggestions I made. And also be someone who doesn't forward the fake information that helps us. In every zombie movie, there are those newscasters who have been working very hard, diligently sharing information before the electricity goes and before everything dies. They're sharing accurate information to help us. But we now have, millions of people who are dedicated to hurting everybody by injecting fake information, disinformation into our lives. And so we have to be vigilant in order to survive and to stay alive in the apocalypse. Thank you very much and look forward to hearing your thoughts.
Sri, thank you. Those tips were phenomenal. And I don't know if you've seen some of the comments, but so many people are actually going into their phones and setting up grayscale and putting their screen time limits on right now. So you're having an immediate impact on our conference attendees. So first of all, thank you so much for that. I want to just start by asking you, Sri, a little bit about what you have been up to since the beginning of the COVID pandemic. I know the answer to this question, but I think it's just it's amazing, and I'd love for you to just tell us a little bit about your show, how it came about, and what you have been doing with it since the pandemic started.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you, everybody. I tweeted out those tips at SREE, so if you want to grab them there, you can. And all those things I mentioned can easily be Googled so that you can know how to operate them on your phone. Thanks again for having me and asking me about what I've been up to. I'm a visiting professor of digital innovation at Stony Brook School of Journalism, and I found myself at the early part of this pandemic with 12 hours less of commuting a week because I wasn't going from New York City, where I usually live, even though I'm coming to you from Puerto Rico now, to Long Island for my classes. And so I started by just having a conversation with friends around the pandemic, and we started that on March 14th or so. And you might remember that was the day that Tom Hanks got sick. And in the very strange year that we've had, that was a kind of tentpole event that got a lot of people's attention, along with the NBA closing down. And we're glad to report that Tom survived and got better. And we have then, since then, every single day for now, today was our 221st show, talked about various aspects of the pandemic, trying to understand the health and financial, economic, and racial and social justice aspects of the pandemic, and trying to learn together. We had Athena on our show to talk about how psychology is part of surviving the pandemic. That was episode 39. So now we're on episode 221 in 221 days. Tells you how much time has passed. And when Athena and I were talking way back then, we would never have imagined that things would be where we are today, where things are as bad, if not worse, in some parts of America, only because of this disinformation and poisoning of our brains that has happened in this country. Just yesterday, I interviewed Dr. Ashish Jha, who many of you know as the one of the doctors on CNN and MSNBC. He's the new dean of the School of Public Health at Brown University, and he was talking about how none of this needed to be as bad as it has been already, and as it'll continue to be. We're looking at a vaccine, he said, next year that will be widely available. And then a year from now, we may have up to 20 vaccines in the market. How do we get people to take them? How do we trust them? What do we trust? When do we use it? All of these are going to be really painful decisions that family members will have to make. On top of that, we have tens of millions of people who've been poisoned against vaccines of all kinds by the president, by Jenny McCarthy, by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Like, these are things that, we shouldn't have to worry about. All other countries have much lower rates of vaccine poisoning, vaccine information and confidence poisoning by their own leaders. And that's where we are today.
So, Sri, I want to ask you, we have some comments here about, people who have had these boundaries around technology for a long time. So, not having a television in the bedroom, and same actually for Joe. But somehow, these little screens slipped in. So, Sri, why is it that it's so much easier for us to keep our boundaries with television and, maybe even our computers than it is with these little devices?
Sure. I want to answer that. I also want to say, because we do the show every day and there are so many great experts on various aspects of the pandemic watching right now, would love to have you on as guests. You see my email address on the screen right there. Would love to have you. To both Joe and the other commenter, Ely, who have kept their phones, have let their phones slip through. I want to share the story of Arianna Huffington, who many of you know from her work, starting Huffington Post. She talks about the day that she was so overworked and so stressed out by everything that she fell asleep on her desk and hit her face on her glass table, and the glass table shattered. She could have permanently blinded herself. And that was the wake-up call that she had. And now she keeps the phone outside the bedroom. She has a little spot where she deposits her phone before going in to bed. Again, that's pre-pandemic. During the pandemic, because we are hearing from our loved ones across time zones, that's I think a good excuse to have your phone. But what is your excuse before the pandemic? Why do you need your phone with you? One of the things that I do and I complain about all the time is that our phones are the first things we touch when we wake up in the morning and the last things we touch before we go to bed, even if we have a live human being next to us. And we have all been seduced by these phones, that we want to know those notifications, as I mentioned, are the real culprit here. And we all need to fight back. And are there ways in which we can let the phone be in the bedroom, but make sure it's only tuned to phone calls? And that on the iPhone and others, there are settings where you can set your phone that even on the do not disturb function, that if somebody calls you back within X number of seconds after the phone is on do not disturb, if they're from on a particular list, the call will come through, so that you don't miss emergency calls, but certainly you're not waking up to hear the latest from some Twitter handle that you're just following for fun.
So Sri, it seems like there is this sort of issue, right, of how multifunctional our phones are. And, the idea, I remember when I was a teenager, I had a phone in my room and I would talk to my friends on the phone, maybe sometimes until a little too late at night. But, I was still at least having vocal contact with a real person. But now, if you want to have a good night conversation with somebody, for example, right? Like you have your phone with you in your bedroom because you're having a conversation with them before bed. So you mentioned, that there are these settings that you can change. Do you have like broader tips kind of about how you can make your phone really serve the goals that you want it to serve in terms of your communication without having it sort of slip into your brain in these ways that we might want to avoid?
Yeah, I would say that, get to know your phone and get to know the features in it. Whichever kind of phone you have, it'll have, especially if you just Google those terms, the screen time and digital well-being on Android, where they give you extreme details on what you can do. I think that technology is something that, as we all know, evolves, but so does the consumption of that technology. For example, when I was the chief digital officer of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, I would be asked all the time, why don't you put QR codes with all the paintings? And I'd say Americans hate QR codes, and they won't use them. And in fact, what has happened is that QR codes are now like in every restaurant by the way, in San Juan, a couple of things that I've noticed that are just fantastic. When you walk into a store or a restaurant, anything indoors, they take your temperature and force you to get hand sanitizer. You can imagine in the mainland, in many parts of the mainland, if they did both those things, people would lose it. So you have to wear a mask. You have to have your temperature taken before you walk through any door, and they give you hand sanitizer on your hand. They don't ask, would you like some, or have it provided. They force you to take the hand sanitizer. And but now every restaurant you go to here, they just have a QR code. They don't have a menu because they don't want you to, reducing contact. So there's another example of technologists like me, alleged futurists like me, who predicted that these things won't take off in America, have seen that happen. One other thing, because I know we have a lot of faculty here, when I was chief digital officer of Columbia University, thinking about the future of education, we predicted that it would be at least till 2025 until a majority of Columbia professors would voluntarily teach a fully online course. Voluntarily being the code word there, a keyword there, and we were thinking that it won't be possible because professors are set in their ways. Well, it didn't take till 2025. It took till March 14th, as you know, when people had 2 days notice to suddenly go online, and even the most skeptical professors had to go online and figure it out. And we learned that students didn't know how to use remote learning, professors didn't know. Of course, thousands of them did, but most of them did not. And so that's what happens with technology, that sometimes there can be an existential threat that focuses your mind. And that's what's happened with the pandemic.
So I have a question, but first I think it's really important that I address the elephant in the room, which is that everybody really likes the elephant that you have in your room. But that actually does bring me sort of to my question, because we're looking at comments while we're having this conversation, right? And so there's the elephant. So everybody really likes it. Go elephant research. So, and an elephant from Kerala, India, my parents' home state in India. So,
I'm sorry, the light. I'm sort of disappearing in this light here. It's that I should have thought about this before.
No, I think it's fine. But I think so. What I was going to ask, because we're right now, as we're having this conversation, we're also like looking at comments, which is part of the format of this show, right? And we bring in comments, but it's one of the things I've noticed about sort of using phones, and we were talking about this, how phones sort of serve the function of phones and televisions. So when we are using our phone, or when we have to use our phone, or when we have to be at work, and even like when you were saying when kids are at school, I notice my kids will be at school, but they'll also be getting texts from their friends. And so are there ways when we need to use this technology for a specific purpose to sort of focus on just that one purpose and not all the other options? You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's certainly something that people think about. By the way, my twins turned 17 in the pandemic, and I think everyone here should just think back for a moment to turning 17 and how much you would hate turning 17 with your parents in a Manhattan apartment in lockdown. Short of getting the virus yourself or having somebody in your family get it, I can't think of a worse situation for a 17-year-old than to be locked down. I would say that one of the ways their school used to handle phones was that it had to be in a bag, in your knapsack, in your locker. You were not allowed to have the phone during class hours. That was a great rule, and I wish more places had that. Of course, now they have their phones in their room. And one thing, if you have younger children, I would recommend to everyone is to get a charging station and put it in the living room and force your children to charge their phones there, and don't allow the phones and the computers in the bedroom at night. I mean, that's something that we did with our kids from the beginning, and they obviously they're the only kids that they know who don't have their phones in their bedroom after they're gone to bed. We did that in part to help them sleep better. Also, the blue light, how you can tune down reduce the blue light on your phone, things like that. The other thing we did was we removed the clock radio from their bedrooms. And so you'll say, wait a minute, that's old-fashioned technology. Well, what the clock radio was doing, especially for my son, was that every few hours he'd wake up and see the time and then worry that he wasn't sleeping enough because he was looking at the time. And just having that red light in the bedroom. So this was a tip we got from someone else. And so we bought an Amazon Echo, the $30 Echo, and put the Amazon Dot, put that in the bedroom. So if they want to know the time, they can ask the time. If they want to hear music, they can, but they can't interact with it the way. So I'm not saying that that's a perfect parenting hack, but it's something that you can think about, especially if you have younger kids, and try to inculcate that earlier in life. Because what we're doing with these phones, what we're giving kids access to, is just so, the best of the world and the worst of the world, all being kind of shoved in their faces all the time. I remember my parents used to worry about, we had access to HBO and how terrible that was when I was a little kid. I actually got HBO because we had an old dial of cable box, and I turned the channels so often from one to another so that we got free HBO. And my parents were horrified that we had it and that we could watch it at night, not in the bedroom. But that's where we were, so quaint. My mother would come home and say, don't play video games, go outside. Now, when I come home, I would be happy if my son was playing video games and not watching other people play video games, which is like,
my kids love watching people play video games. So
and for my kids, Sri, watching HBO shows that are probably not quite appropriate for their age is like how we bond. So much has changed, It's like, okay, you're not on your phone. We're watching something together, and that's a small victory.
Parenting is all small victories, as you know.
Yeah. A lot of times when I watch movies with my kids, they'll be there with their phone like halfway through the movie. I'm like, we're watching a movie, and they're like, well, there's a slow part. So
But isn't that about us also, that we should put our phones away so we can model that behavior?
Yeah, that's true. So actually, that's a good tip of modeling, and that's something that I really need to work on. So
yeah, that's something that I think, for us, when we started really kind of locking down electronics, it made us so aware of our digital addictions, because we can't be telling our kids don't have your phones at the dinner table if we're using our phones at the dinner table. So we have a policy that you can't take them out, but sometimes at the end of dinner, if we want to look something up, you have to ask permission for everybody at the table to take out your phone to look for something.
Here's a tip: if your kids are really young, set the rule about the device-free dinners, and then tape them as they complain about you touching the phone before they have phones. And so we did that with our twins. We recorded them complaining about us using the phones, so that many years later, when they did get their phones, we're able to play their video of them complaining about device-free dinner. So if your kids are young enough, that's something you can use their own words against them.
Awesome. And Neil is pointing out quite rightly that it really is about what you do, not what you say, right?
Thank you. Very good point.
Yeah. So Erica brings up this point about boredom. Now, how do you feel about boredom? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? What's your relationship with boredom?
So as a technology journalist, I often tell folks that, again, I don't always model the best behavior. I'm sort of like a doctor who smokes. Have you ever come across one who's like smoking and telling you that smoking is bad? So I'm like that a little bit. I encourage people to put away their devices, but I have them with me too often. But my wife always says that I cannot be left. I don't like to be left alone with my own thoughts. And so she once took a photograph that lives on in infamy. What I do is I still subscribe to 2 daily print newspapers, which is an odd thing that many of you will find surprising. I also do a thing where I read the Sunday New York Times print edition out loud every Sunday at 8:30 a.m. Eastern on Facebook and Twitter. Please join us tomorrow. We're reading, it's been 5 years that I've been reading the print edition out loud. And tomorrow we're with the New York Times editorial page editor who put together this incredible section called The Case Against Donald Trump. They've taken over the entire Sunday review of the New York Times. And so that editor, Alex Kingsbury, is going to be with us, and we're going to read this. But anyway, so when I have a shower, we have a shower door. And again, I don't know why I'm telling you all this, but we have a shower door.
There's been a lot of sharing happening today, Shri. So
I take my broadsheet daily New York Times newspaper, and because it's a shower door, I lay it over the door. There's a way in which you can read 3/4 of the page if you hang it over the door. And I have my shower with this print newspaper in the shower with me. And my wife says that that's because I can't bear to be alone with my own thoughts and have a moment to myself, and that there's something really wrong with me. But that's how much I constantly need information. And those of you who are Seinfeld fans might remember that Kramer did something similar, not with news, but he would cook and cut his vegetables in the shower with him. So at least I can say I don't do that. He would cut his salad, the vegetables for his salad while having a shower, because after all, you're getting clean, why not clean the vegetables? So I don't do that. But I believe that what we heard earlier about, Christina says, whoa, and I thought I can multitask at a whole other level. But I want to salute the encouragement of boredom. I think we used to have that as kids, that we would be bored. My wife talks about how her parents had fallen victim to an encyclopedia salesman and had bought a encyclopedia that was at home in the summer and there was nothing to do. So she would pick up the encyclopedia and just kind of flip through it. That would never happen today because that nobody has encyclopedias at home. They have them all on their phones. But kids are not allowed to be bored. Like we always want them super busy and every minute occupied, because we know that if we don't occupy their minds, the phones will. And you're competing with some of the most famous, some of the most influential, some of the most popular, and some of the worst people in the world are all competing with you for your kids' attention. So you're so scared of letting them be bored that you occupy their time as much as possible.
Well, and the nice thing about an encyclopedia is that as you're reading it, you don't eventually end up watching a white supremacy video, right?
Right.
It's not an algorithm that is sort of, watching what you do and then shaping what it serves up to you based on what you've done. So, Shri, before we bring on our next guest, I want to ask you, what do you think is the number one way that we can use social media and technology for good in this very difficult time?
Well, thank you. That's a wonderful point to end on. I think be more generous. Use your platforms and your followers and whatever channel you're on to help other people. Be a great pointer to other people. You don't have to create fantastic content to be successful. If you can be a great pointer to other people, I like to retweet other folks' content. Just keep in mind that when you are retweeting, you are helping them get attention. So don't use the excuse that you're trying to, you've seen this thing which says RTs are not equals endorsements. That's a whole other conversation. I don't think that's true. The president, when he retweets a racist, nobody gives him any credit for saying, well, he may not be a racist. He is a racist when he's retweeting racists and other times. But for all of us, I think what we can do with social media is to think about where we're using it, how we're using it, and to share the best parts of the internet, which can really help so many people, instead of all the problems that we end up perpetuating and sharing all over the world.
Go ahead, Dave.
I was just going to say that's an interesting take on it, because I think often I think I've thought of social media as where you and I think a lot of people often think of social media as where you stop self-presenting, right? And you can argue with people and things like this. And so this idea of sort of being conscious about what we put on social media and making sure it still reflects our values, I think is actually a really, really nice.
Thank you. I will just point out also, you had asked earlier about, are there ways to focus our work? And there are these focus apps on your laptop and on your phone that you can download, and that will just help you focus so that you can write instead of getting all the bells and whistles chiming all the time.
Actually, I've used some of those, and they help a lot. So those are really nice. So yeah, technology doing good. So,
yeah. Well, and Sri, it seems like really that's a lot of kind of what is motivating you in your work these days, right? With your daily calls. And do you have a preview for us of what might be coming up in the next couple of days with your COVID calls, in case people want to tune in?
Sure. Well, I recommend everyone, if you're up at 8:30 in the morning, but these are all recorded and available afterwards on youtube.com/Sreenet, which is my SREENET. But I'll just tell you about the call I had this morning, a show we did this morning at 9 a.m. Eastern. Two women, Bonita Stewart and Jacqueline Adams, about women of color leading change in the middle of this crisis. Their book is called A Blessing. And as you may know, A Gathering of Unicorns is called A Blessing. And they were talking about women of color who have to be so much better than they are than everyone else in order to survive in business. And Bonita is one of the senior most African-American women at Google. And I learned so much from their book and from the conversation. So if you go to youtube.com/Sreenet, you can find it's also pinned to the top of my Twitter page. And thank you for this opportunity to be with all of you. I've already had so much fun, but looking forward to hearing everyone else too.
Sri, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you back shortly. Thank you for sticking with us here in the studio.
Yeah, and I think that book is a good thing for people to check out while they're driving and showering and washing vegetables and preparing dinner, if they need something to read.
That's right. If you don't have enough going on in your life already, it's another thing that you could use as part of your multitasking.
Exactly. So who is our next guest?
Well, so we all know that one of the challenges with social media is that sometimes we think we're consuming it as we're devouring the endless feed coming in through our devices, only to discover that it is consuming our own brains. Here to tell us more about this paradox is Jeanette Vigalotti. Jeanette, welcome to the show. You are going to have to unmute your mic.
Yeah. Sometimes, speaking is really difficult in the zombie apocalypse. So some interesting things have happened for me since the zombie outbreak. I'm an interdisciplinary doctoral student at Virginia Commonwealth University's Media Art Text program, and I also work in public history. So I've had the opportunity to wander around a lot of digital spaces lately. And here in Florida, I found this account left behind on a hotel desk. And if you don't mind, I'd love to read it and share. I think this writer was really into literature and literature about the zombie apocalypse. So we're gonna take a look at this together. So this account that I found says this: I sometimes think about before the zombie outbreak. And it's part of why I'm writing. It's the historian and storyteller impulse, the urge to document, index, digest experiences, a desire to share animates me. And while I'm unsure where this archival source will be entombed in this new world, I know that it is important to document the early years. So I need to tell you, whoever you are and whenever you are, about how Sally Wen Mao's poem Live Feed provides some framework for us to understand zombie hunger and embodied social media relations. So it all starts with a biological understanding of metabolism, the process of converting food into energy to sustain life. And I'm sure you recall that our social media sites like Facebook offer lots of textual nods to eating. Clickbait, there's a live feed, and sometimes we talk about how there's food for thought, linguistically approximating cultural goods to food. But it turns out metabolism is much messier. Hannah Landecker explains in a recent study on metabolism suggests that the components of plants that enter the bodies that eat them participate in regulating those bodies' genes, leading to physiological change. And it is actually quite a surprise to find the components of plants in the general activity of regulation, the determination of what process happens or not. This is because food is generally used to provide the stuff out of which bodies are made and is generally not understood to run the operation of being a body. So we need to digest this. The consuming body desired the plant substance. The plant substance, once ingested, refuses passivity. Instead, the consumed plant plays an active role in regulating what processes happen and what cannot. So just a couple of things here. The dead plant shapes the consumer's body, challenging not only the integrity of a completely autonomous self, but also challenges the seemingly stable positions of life and death, consumer and consumed. Within Western American culture, there is power, preference, and hierarchy associated with the positions of life and consumer. Identity is wrapped in modes of consumption. This is particularly evident in the rise of the influencer. And a biological understanding of metabolism allows me to think more clearly about how self-representation is a co-productive force, which is most visible on digital social media bodies. It is in these spaces that users consume content, which means consuming each other, which enacts a kind of textual cannibalism. The consumptive and metabolic habits of textual cannibalism introduce our zombie. And Sally Wen Mao's poem Live Feed is a good case study for what I call zombie hunger, the desire to eat, to be eaten, and regulate the social body. Zombie hunger in digital social media sites accounts for the ways that personal information metabolizes the uploader to influence the actions of users that digest the uploader's information. And while that sounds like a mouthful, I think Sally Wen Mao's poem helps us understand how this happens. In Live Feed, the roles of consumer and consumed, self and other blur through the repetition of pronouns you and I. Mao makes clear digital bodies enter into a desiring relation through consumption, and these digital bodies occupy a subjectivity that straddles subject and object, consumer and consumed. Wendy Chun explains in Big Data as Drama the ways in which the pronoun you is a, quote, particularly shifty shifter operating on the border between singular and plural. You locks a poem's reader and social media user in place, turns both positions into a kind of prey. Though the speaker is never explicitly given a name, I will refer to the personified, non-living, uploaded information actant as narrative I that speaks to you, the object of the poem and audience surrogate. Narrative I introduces horror conventions in the opening lines, after I am dead, I will hunt you. Coding death not with stagnation and a lack of metabolic functions, but a site replete with activity, hunger, and desire. The word will invokes the future, a temporal space normally associated with reproduction, progeny, the metabolizing consumer, the living. But here, Will indicates the future is imbricated with decomposition, the arts of dying. Narrative I vows to hunt you. Both of these words are crucial, setting up the initial allusion to the figure of the zombie. Hunt carries two valences. The first, to search and pursue. The second, kill for sport or food. The future dead living speaker predatorily and hungrily pursues you, the reader of the poem that is a stand-in for the social media user. The poem, after all, unfolds in a live feed, a digital space where content is consumed, recorded, uploaded, and disseminated in real time. Throughout the poem, narrative I is a hungry, predatory zombie figure, a conceit reinforced through images of exposed innards and devourable limbs. But why is narrative I hunting you? What is it that narrative I wants of you? For you to share narrative I and you to taste and be quenched of your thirst. Narrative I wants you to admit desire and hunger for other users' embodied experiences. Narrative I, through zombie hunger, creates a reconsideration of relations that informs and shapes the protocol for digital social interactions.
So, Jeanette, you found this. Tell us exactly where you found this text.
So I found this text in a hotel in Florida, and it was just on the desk there with a pile of books, with the book Oculus by Sally Wynne Mao, from which this poem comes from.
And yeah. So what do you make of it? Is it basically telling us that, we're subjecting ourselves to social media that's kind of changing our relationship with how we process information and how we even process each other?
I think that it's a text that's helping us understand how we process information about each other and what kind of power we have when we upload to influence the actions of others. And I think actually Shree's talk kind of got into this with this can be used in very damaging ways towards disinformation, but also their zombie hunger in this way could also indicate where relationships are malfunctioning and we need to spend more time and give attention to.
So it's really kind of a call for us to be a little bit more aware of how we're feeling in relation to the social media that we consume and that is consuming us.
Yeah, I think that's like a fair way to look at it.
Dave, do you have anything you want to add? You're on mute, by the way.
Yeah, I was trying to protect my thoughts from social media. I guess, no, my question would be sort of, so how are there ways for us to sort of live in symbiosis with this media that is consuming us?
I think symbiosis is a really interesting frame. It makes me think about the way that Donna Haraway talks about symbiosis, because those are non-innocent reactions. And I'm not even certain, I want to put good and bad values on this. I think that there are ways that this can be used very generatively, and I think that there are ways that this media can be used very apocalyptically, damagingly.
Well, maybe a word actually that we could use is commensal, which actually means eating together and is sort of neutral in terms of whether it's positive or negative.
I like that. I'm going to integrate that or digest that later.
So let's bring Srinivasan back into the conversation with us here. Sri, what are your thoughts about this issue of are we the consumer or are we the consumed in social media?
Well, thank you, and what a great talk we just had. I think that was much more in keeping with the way Athena envisioned, the speakers.
Oh, no. It's all about conversation, and we welcome all different approaches. So that was, it's great to have you here with us, Shri, and can't wait to hear your thoughts.
So as you know, a lot of people have been pointing out that even before any thoughts of the apocalypse or zombies, that we are the product, right, on social media. And I recommend to every single person who hasn't done this yet to please read the amazing deep dive in the New Yorker this week about Facebook, because Facebook has been telling us year after year with every crisis that just give them time, they will fix the problems. But what this article shows clearly is they have no incentive to fix the problem. They don't understand the problem. They don't want to understand the problem. And that's what social media is doing to us. It is killing us. It is eating our brains. It is doing all these horrible things. And people like me continue to use it because there are good parts of Facebook. And for those of you who've, let's say, moved on from Facebook or are boycotting Facebook, you may still be using WhatsApp or Instagram or Messenger. And so we need to fix the problem. Boycotting Facebook is not the answer necessarily, but holding the company accountable for what it's doing. And I'll just make a pitch to folks who may not be using WhatsApp. Americans don't use WhatsApp the way the rest of the world does. That WhatsApp is a perfect example of the weaponization of hateful information in countries like India, in Myanmar and elsewhere, Sri Lanka. And so the fact that Facebook has 35,000 people working on security and fighting disinformation, what does that tell you? That there's a real problem with the platform, and just throwing more people to fix it when fundamentally they have no incentive to fix it is a problem. My last thought on this is that the great Fred Friendly, who was a journalist who George Clooney played in Good Night and Good Luck, a movie that some of you may have seen, he said that television makes so much money doing its worst that it has no incentive to do its best. And I think in the world of social media, Facebook makes so much money doing its worst, it has no incentive to do its best.
So are there ways that we could better incentivize? Because I do think there's this thing of, I think people blame Facebook, but there's this idea of if you look at other websites, there's a lot that are way worse, and I do think Facebook is trying, but are there ways to do a better job of incentivizing these corporations
well, this gets down to the issue of the business model, right? I think, and right now the business model is one that does not incentivize these platforms to provide us with things that will, help us in terms of maintaining our well-being, having our boundaries, etc. So I think the question is really, is there room to shift to another kind of business model? Or can we regulate the shit out of it to make it not be as damaging? To me, that's the fundamental question.
I'd love to hear Jeanette's thoughts on that.
I appreciate your question, Athena, about which kind of shift do we need to make. And I've been thinking about this a lot in terms of how hashtags function, and how hashtags can be used kind of like a zombie horde to force a conversation about sets of relations that are super toxic, super disgusting, like white supremacy, like sexual assault, and making those narratives just part of what happens on those platforms instead of just rewarding the kind of upwardly mobile narratives that the functions on Facebook suggest for you. That there's been a way tactically that users have gotten together to push against that. Which isn't exactly an answer, but I do think that there's bubbles of this happening.
I guess, so the other question I keep going back to when we talk about, because this is a topic that comes up again and again, how can we make this better? And like you were just mentioning Good Night and Good Luck, and that reminded me of Network, where the news stations were all switching to this sort of commercial-based thing, and then they were becoming sensationalized. And so it makes me think that this does seem like a problem that's been a problem for years, for long before the internet, through radio. There's been plenty of really wacky radio stations that you could find. And so what are the ways that we as humans can sort of change our own incentives in order to
Yeah, well, Dave, I mean, this gets at the question of, is it up to us as individuals, or is there a systemic problem that should be dealt with systemically? And, it's hard, right? Because it's like, on one hand, yes, we should take some personal responsibility, do the things that we can do to regulate ourselves. But there also is something going on at the sort of, systemic level.
Sure.
Yeah. Sri, do you have thoughts about this issue of, where do we intervene? At what level?
So let me bring in a terrible human being named Ajit Pai, PAI, who is the Federal Communications, the chief of the FCC, who, by the way, happens to be Indian American. And normally, Indian Americans love to claim any famous person who is Indian American. We love to claim them as we're related to them. We know them very well. So you'll find a lot of people who love claiming, Kamala Harris and M. Night Shyamalan and all of those people, but nobody claims Ajit Pai. And what he's doing now is he's going after the tech companies with regulation. And I think there is regulation needed, but not the way that he's going to do it. One of the amazing things that Republicans have done in this upside down world is say that they are being censored by the tech companies. Whereas if you go in and look at the top 10 stories that circulate every single day on Facebook, at least 6 to 8 of them are from Fox News, Breitbart, Daily Caller, Dan Bongino. Like, these are, terrible people who have terrible sense of what, they're posting disinformation, active disinformation, and that's the most popular, most retweeted, most engaged content online is by these people. So the Republicans have, and then the Trump administration in particular, have successfully told all of us that the right is being censored, when in fact the right and QAnon and these other misinformation, disinformation, poisonous content is being shared. So I think there needs to be regulation, but how do we do that in a way without getting out of hand and making the internet less free and open to dissidents in other countries, for example, is what we have to be careful about.
Yeah, it's a tough challenge. We're about to go. So Athena is now on the phone with Mo Lotman, who's the techno skeptic. He's really, so Sri, he's basically taken your advice and cranked it up to 11. He's calling in over a landline phone, because that's what he uses. And so we're gonna, I think Athena's still connecting, but I think it'll be really fun to get his take on all of this.
So I have Mo here. I'm calling him on a landline from my phone, and I'm going to try to pipe it into my speaker here. Mo, can you say hello to everybody?
Hello, everyone.
Can you hear him?
Yes.
All right, Mo, would you share with us your thoughts about how technology has kind of invaded many aspects of our lives? Tell us a little bit about who you are and why you are the techno skeptic.
Sure. Well, I kind of want to. I will do that. But before I forget, I just want to jump in because I've been listening along and it's been very interesting. And when we're talking about social media, I think it's important to remember that, Marshall McLuhan famously said, "The media is the message." The ways in which media changes us is often, or the way we interact with it is often more important than the content of the media itself. And the simplest way to think about that is a car horn. A car horn, the media is the message with a car horn. And if anyone really doubts that there's a way to use a car horn in a constructive manner, there's a way to alert someone that you're about to hit them. But the fact of the matter is that the car horn, it influences how communications happen on cars tremendously, so much so that arguably all of the accidents that have been averted in the history of cars may never equal the amount of annoyances that the car horn has caused. And I think that that's just a simple way of explaining the influence of social media. And the sort of fundamental problem with social media isn't how it's being used or what's on it, it's the social media part. And I think that in order to fix it, I mean, you guys have been discussing, we need to fix the problem, and could we somehow forward really sweet things to each other, or regulate the shit out of it, as Athena said. And the answer is just, in short, no, because it's like trying to, you can use a newspaper as an umbrella if you want to, but it's not really going to be the use that most people are going to get out of a newspaper. And I think the same with social media, because it's basically, you're taking two different currents of communication that were historically very separate, which is peer-to-peer and broadcast, and you're trying to merge them. And the fact of the matter is, this is a terrible idea, and they shouldn't be merged. And I had this one quote, which I kind of liked, which is from Lewis Mumford, who's a famous historian of technology, and among other things. And he says, great poems like Homer's or significant events deserve worldwide circulation. More commonplace thoughts, events, and scenes transmitted only to keep the deprived senses from starvation by giving the illusion of life do not deserve such enlargement. In any quantity, they destroy the personal reactions to the living moment. And that's social media.
Wow, Mo, that was very powerful. And I have to ask you, what is your personal relationship with technology like? Now, you're our techno-skeptic correspondent. So, I mean, that tells us a little bit about, what your approach is. But, do you use technology at all in your life?
Yeah, obviously I must, because here I am talking to you. I sounded the techno-skeptic about 5-6 years ago, and because I was kind of alarmed by the direction that technology was taking in our world. And so I'm obviously using technology, but I will say that I'm very, very careful about how I use it, which ones I use, and I'm also in an ongoing process to divest myself of technology, which is sort of like peeling the layers of an onion. And each time you sort of reveal a new thing that you didn't think about, and you have to go, oh, okay, well, maybe I don't want that either. And so for me, that's just like, that's the most controversial or famous thing that I don't do is I don't own a cell phone. But there are other things that I don't do. I don't have a car. I basically have tried to eliminate plastic from my life. I stopped using a clothes dryer. I stopped using air conditioning. There are a number of things, but I do still have a computer, and I do obviously still have a landline telephone.
Yeah, and how about email and social media? Do you use any of those?
I do use email. I'm pretty limited in terms of how often I check it. I usually check it 2 or 3 times a day, and I'm off screens entirely 3 days a week. And I do not do any social media.
So, Mo, do you have any advice for people who might be sort of reconsidering their relationship with technology, or any, speed bumps that you ran into that people should be aware of if they're trying to de-technologize their lives?
Yeah. First of all, if you're rethinking things, then I applaud you and encourage you in every way. That's number one. And obviously, everyone's going to be on their own path and trajectory, and they're not going to, people aren't all going to make the same choices, and et cetera. But I really feel like it's important to understand what various technologies are doing. And when you have a more complete understanding of it, when you can kind of step back and see what it's doing, I think you get for me anyway, it's what I like to call falling out of love with technology. And I think that's where, maybe it was Dave who asked, like, maybe we need to figure out a way that, like, we need to figure out a way to change our own views. I think that's exactly right. I think we need to change our own views because obviously we're driving this. You know, we can remove the influence of social media instantly by all abandoning our social media accounts. We could do it tomorrow. Every single person listening to this could quit their account tomorrow, and really immediately it would go away. So consider that. I mean, that's a pretty powerful option. So I think believing that social media is somehow the truth, or that it's the public square, or that it's democracy, I think it's false, because as we know, the social media is run by algorithms, they're written by these corporations. We already know these corporations have no interest in our well-being, as has been mentioned several times on this program. So these corporations don't care. Their algorithms are not designed to find things that are helpful or newsworthy, like the old legacy media, which is much maligned these days. So you traded a bunch of gatekeepers that were not perfect, and we all acknowledge that it wasn't necessarily the best to have like 3 news networks in the country, but they all actually wanted to do news gathering. I mean, they didn't have any ulterior motive. There wasn't any real other incentive. Yes, in fact, a lot of them lost money and carried on their news gathering anyway, because they felt it was a duty, public duty. Now, you don't hear Mark Zuckerberg talking about public duty. So the trade that we made, this abandoning of those sort of legacy gatekeepers for what is thought to be some sort of, democratic ideal. Well, it's not a democratic ideal. And so you basically trading the influence of a bunch of people who may not have been perfect, but at least they had their hearts in the right place and they were trained journalists, for, an antisocial 19-year-old. At least when he founded the company, Mark Zuckerberg. Okay, so that's the trade-off that we made. So it's not really surprising that we are where we are.
Mo, thank you so much. We would love to have you back on the show again. I'm going to give Shri the chance to respond here. And thank you so much for joining us via your landline and, making a compromise with, the technology so that you could be with us here today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Athena.
That was amazing. I used to call myself a tech evangelist and skeptic, but not as skeptical as him. Clearly, I learned so much. I think that a lot of us need a phone, need the internet, can't stay away from it because we need it for our work. But I think his suggestion to reduce access to this and our dependence on this is a great call to arms. And as long as as long as we can do that, but not everyone's going to be able to do that, and we don't want to leave the internet to just the folks or leave Facebook just to the folks who will exploit it for the worst things, because so many other people use it innocently and get barraged by terrible, terrible things.
Thank you so much, Shri, for being with us. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our next guest. So Vaughn Becker, we'll be talking with you. You are a cognitive scientist and evolutionary psychologist looking at ancient perceptual biases and how they might get in the way of effective detection of zombies. Vaughn, we'd love to hear what you have to share with us today.
Well, thanks for having me, Athena and Dave. It's a pleasure to be here. Yes, I want to talk to you about some research that we've been doing. Give me just a moment. And I'll cue up my talk. So I want to talk to you about detecting signals of pathogen threat. And maybe we can find some lessons for the zombie apocalypse in this work. So zombie detection, according to Hollywood, should be very easy. It's pretty easy to tell, well, actually, maybe it's not so easy. But many viruses do effectively turn us into walking delivery systems, and detecting that relies on subtler cues. This makes it challenging for us to perform tasks like predicting which social targets pose a significant threat of contagion. detecting the symptoms of those threats, and remembering who recently presented with those symptoms. All of this can be profitably explored with cognitive methodologies that my laboratory uses, like signal detection. But if you want another example, Randy Nesse here at ASU recently published a paper on the smoke detector principle, where he invoked the signal detection metaphor as something that could have evolved as a part of our body's ability to avoid ancestral threats. So let's think about basic signal detection logic. If I have to detect a zombie, bloody flesh hanging off of them, attacking me, not really speaking, there's a signal of zombie, and then there's my response, my decision about whether this is a zombie or not. And presumably that's a fairly easy task to say yes when the signal is present. But it is possible that you can sometimes have people presenting with some symptoms of this, and they don't actually have the zombie virus, and that can lead to false alarms. And Randy Nesse's smoke detector model really evokes this sense of the false alarm. It's as if we have an evidence axis of various cues combined together, and below a certain criterion, we can say, no, that's not a zombie, but above a certain criterion, we say, yes, that's a zombie. But these distributions of evidence overlap between the signal and the noise. And so thinking about it like that, we can shift our criterion in a way that can increase the false alarms and avoid the costly misses of zombies. On the other hand, we can also think about such a model in terms of sensitivity. How much do these two distributions of evidence, the two distributions of no zombie and zombie, how much do they separate? And that is called sensitivity, or it's a discriminability parameter. And that's one of the things I'd like to talk about today. So many of the cues of viral zombie hit are, of course, ambiguous even in the present day. It's often hard to tell some living people from zombies. We wanted to come up with a laboratory task in which we had something that involved plausibly zombie-like threats. And so we took photos from the Chicago Face database, and we modified them with a Photoshop technique that modified them in a way that people use to either make zombies or make them look ill or make people look like methamphetamine addicts. Why people want to do that? Well, you've already talked about the pointlessness of social media, so I don't need to go into that. We then gave participants a task: discriminate between these two different unmodified and modified faces. And we framed the discrimination in terms of either a contagious disease threat or an aggressive methamphetamine addict, tapping into two motivational systems: disease avoidance and aggression avoidance, which we think ancestral conditions probably built into us to have this false alarm, this willingness to false alarm, this smoke detector principle. We also made the task a little difficult by blurring the faces, because in their unblurred variations, it's fairly easy to figure out which ones are which. So the first thing I'd like to share is that we do indeed see biases that look like this smoke alarm type of bias. Overall, we see biases. So people are trying to judge whether this threat is here, and they tend to make more false alarms than they should if you look at their hit rates. And so you can see here that all the biases to identify a threat are above 0. This is in a z-score metric, but that's not important. What you can see also is that there's also more of a bias to see male targets as posing these threats, and in particular, male targets as posing aggressive threats. We also saw some evidence of some more specific biases as a function of the target ethnicity or race. That's not terribly important at this point. One of the coolest things that we found in this study, however, was this sensitivity parameter that I talked about, B prime. So in the first graph here, you'll see that in the disease frame relative to the aggression frame, people are actually more sensitive. They're able to discriminate better. These are exactly the same faces. So depending on how it's described to you, participants seem to be able to liberate more cognitive resources to perform the disease detection task. Now, there's a number of higher order interactions that, in the interest of time, I don't want to get into. You can back this up since it's being recorded and check that out if you're interested. But the other thing I wanted to point out is if we are seeing this phenomenon where the framing leads to increased sensitivity, we ran a second study to look and see whether individual differences in disease avoidance might lead to an increase. And sure enough, as you can see here, this D prime parameter for the high disease avoidance folks is significantly higher than it is for the low disease participants. We're using a measure that one of our colleagues, Beck and Neal, developed, the Fundamental Motives Inventory, 3 items that ask people about how disease avoidant they are. And we get some really nice results. And this data, I should point out, was collected in the early days of COVID-19, and there seems to be a particular vigilance to the folks that were at that time in the media really being vilified, especially by the zombie in chief. And so we did have an effect of that where people were liberating more of these resources and being more sensitive to the Asian targets. We're currently replicating this work. We're expecting that that phenomenon is going to drop out. We might see some other interesting phenomena as a function of the kind of political rhetoric that we're hearing right now. I also want to point out that in addition to using this method to look at detection, you can also use it to look at memory. And here, we also saw some interesting sensitivity effects where we had, I've divided this up into all of our participants and just the white participants only. We seem to again have vigilance and memory for the male targets. That's what I mean by T male there. And then another interesting phenomenon that kind of loops us back into the political discussion that we've been having is that it appears that the liberal participants are actually showing a more sensitive memory than the conservative participants are. So here I've got conservatives down here on the left and liberals on the right. You can see there's no real sex difference there, but there are some other analyses that get a little bit more nuanced. We see some of our conservative participants actually over-interpreting threat whenever they are looking at people that they think are undocumented immigrants, and whenever they're looking at gay and lesbian participants, even though there's no evidence that these folks would pose any more of a threat than anyone else in the COVID-19 times. Finally, I want to point out that disease avoidance, again, makes some of this. When we look at bias, you can see that the more disease avoidant you are, the more of a bias you have to see disease. There's overall in this particular version bias away from detecting disease, but this effective disease avoidance motives replicates across a number of other variations of this as well.
This is absolutely fascinating. I'm sorry that I have to cut you off because we have still 2 more people before the end of the session. I would love to hear more from you about this issue. I mean, it seems like it's extremely relevant to figuring out how our ancient prejudices are emerging and interacting with the zombie apocalypse that we're in. So maybe we could even bring you on as a correspondent sometime in the next few days to talk a little more about this. Speaking of our correspondents, we have with us Gary Dirks, our Global Futures correspondent. Gary, what do you think the future has in store for us? And what do we need in order to build a better future together?
So this has been a pretty amazing session, and it would be easy enough to go on for an hour just reflecting on what I've heard. But there's sort of 2 things that really resonate with me in this conversation. First, as I think about what lies ahead, we've got amazing transitions that we have to make as a species. Climate change means we have to completely reinvent the energy system. When we do that, it's going to affect the water system, it's going to affect the food system. We have massive social justice issues. So there's change coming on a scale that has never happened with human beings, which means we've got to cooperate in ways that are pretty much unprecedented. And for me, there's a couple of things that are absolutely fundamental to being able to do that I think are really relevant to what we've heard today. One is, how do you manage disagreement? A lot of what we're hearing is how people are getting, through social media, they're getting drawn into all sorts of really edgy conversations that are prone to a lot of misinformation or people's personal biases. How do we manage disagreement? Because the way forward in any of these things I just talked about is not obvious. We're going to have to find our way along. And in fact, that's what we're experiencing with COVID. There's clearly some things that are no-brainers. You need to wear a mask. You need to wash your hands. People better take the vaccine. But there's a lot of stuff that policymakers have to decide on that isn't so obvious. So the first thing is this whole business about how you handle disagreement. The second then is, the ability, or not the ability, but the temptation to leave people behind in these transitions is going to be overwhelming. And it's going to take a lot of soul searching to make sure that we don't leave people behind. And when I say leave people behind, I mean, for example, I think we've got an economic catastrophe coming during the course of next year. And there's going to be a lot of people hurting. There are going to be people on the street. We got to have some real empathy in how we deal with them. Now, one of the things that really comes through for me, and something that's a bit of a hobby horse for me, and I've been trying to get you, Athena, interested in this subject, is that the landscape that we live in is dominated by big collectives, big groups of people. We heard about Facebook and the way they behave. And, they're just one of thousands of these things. And it's really important to realize that they don't behave like people. They're composed of people, and the people inside of them behave like people, but they don't behave like people. They don't have the empathy, for example. And we're going to have to figure this out. We're going to have to be able to deal with these things, and social media makes it more complicated.
Great points, Gary. I'm going to bring in our apocalypse economics correspondent, Roger White. So, Roger, Gary was just mentioning that we have a big economic challenge coming up. What does history have to say about the economics of apocalypses, and what do you think our future is looking like from an economic perspective?
Well, I think Gary's definitely on the right track, in that there's going to be a lot of people at risk of being left behind, right? When we think about how different apocalyptic events in economic history have, say, affected the underlying populations, in most cases there isn't, say, an overwhelming surge of empathy that brings everybody along for the ride, right? I think when the going gets tough, people tend to get left behind. So I completely agree with Gary. It's going to be a risk. It's going to be something we're going to have to navigate. I think the default human condition is, we want to help people, but when the going gets rough, I've got to make sure that, I get to high ground and my family gets to high ground before the floodwaters hit, right? We've heard, maybe a lot of scary things in this session, and I had some great insights, and, we're close to wrapping up. So maybe the last thing I'll say is that, societies are somewhat fragile, right? War, pestilence, disease, famine, climate change, right? These things have, repeatedly doomed societies in the past. But humans as a race are pretty resilient, right? We've got, a lot of tools. We've got big brains. Individually, we might be a little fragile, but collectively, I don't think COVID's going to doom us. I don't think the zombies are going to doom us. Again, the world might look very different afterwards, but, I think maybe some of the language we're using in that, this is unprecedented, or that this is, catastrophic. It's a natural disaster. I don't want to say it's not a catastrophe. This particular apocalypse has, caused 200,000 deaths in the U.S. But on the grand scheme of human history, I think, 1,000 years, we're going to look back and think COVID was a road bump, right? At least I hope so. So yeah, I would just, encourage people to remember that as a species, we've got incredible resilience, and we've certainly made it through more difficult times than this.
Thanks, Roger. That's a great way for us to end today. I mean, I think, being aware of the challenging situation that we're in, having the ability to kind of collectively wrap our heads around it is only going to put us in a better position to figure out what to do and how we can be resilient in the face of this sort of multitude of zombie apocalypses that we're facing at this moment. So thank you, Roger. Thank you very much, Gary, for sharing your brains with us. And thank you to all of you for joining us for the afternoon edition of Undead Live. Tune in to Dr. Zed coming up next here on Channel Zed.
And wait, and 8:30 AZ time, the no-brainer quiz night. Don't miss it.
Don't miss the no-brainer quiz night.
Bring a frosty beverage, your big brain. It'll be a fun time. It'll be a nice, good time for everybody amid all the seriousness. So, all right. Thanks.
It's crazy, but it seems so logical. I can't deny that there is something supernatural with you.